In this video, I will explain how and why a buyer can back out of a real estate transaction or unilaterally cancel a purchase agreement and get their EMD back, their earnest money deposit returned, even though all contingencies have been removed by the buyer or there were no contingencies to begin with. Now, this is coming up more and more because we're in this crazy seller's market and buyers are making offers with waived contingencies or very short contingency periods. And then once all contingencies get removed, buyers will get stuck and they'll find out that they can't back out or something came up. So now more than ever, I've gotten these calls about what to do and what options a buyer has. So I'm not advocating for buyers to use this loophole. I'm just telling you that this exists and everyone should know about it. Now, I know we're looking at a sea of text here. Don't get overwhelmed. I'm not going to read through it and make this super boring by reading a bunch of legal text. I'm just going to show you where the provision is in the purchase agreement. And I need to preface this by saying that business is conducted slightly differently in Northern California and Southern California. And in this context, it has to do with disclosure delivery. Now, in Northern California, disclosures are delivered prior to both parties entering into a purchase agreement, or typically they're delivered prior to entering the purchase agreement. Whereas in Southern California, usually both parties have signed off on the purchase agreement and then the seller delivers disclosures once they're in escrow. Now, in Northern California, it's actually more efficient to deliver disclosures prior. And I'll show you in this context, and I'll draw your attention here to paragraph 11G of a purchase agreement. It says if any disclosure specified and it names paragraphs where those disclosures are referenced, or there's an amended disclosure that's delivered to the buyer after the offer is signed, then the buyer has up to 3 days if deliveries of this disclosure is done in person, or 5 days if it's in the mail or email, and email's basically the industry standard, to cancel. So what that means is if all disclosures were delivered prior to entering into a contract, meaning both parties have not signed the purchase agreement yet, if all disclosures are delivered prior, this closes the loophole for the buyer. And that's what you see as being standard in Northern California. However, there's a big exception to that, and that is amended disclosures or HOA disclosures. HOA disclosures are typically, or I should say HOA docs, are typically delivered while in escrow. Now, that will afford the buyer more time to review those docs, even if the buyer already received disclosures prior to going into the contract. Or let's say the seller remembered something, or that they didn't put on the transfer disclosure statement, or maybe something happened, like there was a flooding during the escrow. Anytime a seller has to amend their disclosures with a new material fact or deliver HOA docs, that will afford the buyer up to 5 days to cancel for a reason mentioned in that disclosure. Now, in Southern California, since disclosures are delivered after the fact, it's a free-for-all. I mean, basically, from the buyer has 5 days from the last disclosure received to cancel. Now, let's bring in the contingency period. What happens if contingencies have been removed? Or what happens if disclosures are delivered 2 days prior to the expiration of the contingency period? Now, I'm speaking statewide at this point. It doesn't matter because legally that buyer has up to 5 days to cancel depending on when they received disclosures. So this is why it's absolutely crucial that a seller gets all disclosures to a buyer as soon as possible, because although the buyer is still obligated contractually to remove that contingency, they can still cancel due to what they've discovered in that new disclosure or amended disclosure. Let me jump right over here, give you one last little snippet of boring legal text. But if you want to see where this all relates to, it basically says if any disclosure or amendment of any disclosure, and give some other provisions here. But again, it says if it's delivered in person, a buyer has 3 days or 5 days after delivery by mail or electronic record, so email, to cancel, to terminate the agreement. So there you have it. That's, if you have any questions, leave a comment, but it comes up what happens if a buyer needs a way out or is looking for a way out. And it shouldn't be exploited, because this isn't where the buyer blames their failed loan. Let me give you a quick example before I end this video. If a buyer can't get a loan and they've waived the loan or removed the loan contingency, just because the seller delivers a disclosure or HOA docs come a little bit later, that should not be a reason for a buyer to exploit this law. It's a law to protect consumers. Instead, this truly is a way for a buyer to not get stuck if they've removed all disclosures, or excuse me, all contingencies, and then a new disclosure arrives. Because obviously, if you've removed all contingency and your deposits become non-refundable, it's not fair to a buyer to be stuck and then a seller to say, oh, by the way, there's this thing that's wrong, or there's this thing in the CC&Rs of the HOA that restrict you having your dog, or something important that could affect the desirability of the property to the buyer. Now, and the reason I'm saying that is so that someone doesn't say, oh, well, I got HOA docs a little late, but I can't get my loan, so I'll just blame it on the HOA docs, even though the whole reason I'm canceling is because my loan failed. Anyway, if you have questions about scenarios, leave a comment. I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching.